The transport shuttle descended toward the massive orbital station that hung above the planet Concordia like a silver crown in the darkness of space. Mira Chen pressed her face against the viewport and watched as the Galactic Military Academy grew larger with each passing moment. Her hands rested in her lap, covered by worn leather gloves that had seen better days. The fingerless gloves were brown and creased from years of use, the stitching coming loose in places where her father had repaired them countless times. She flexed her fingers and felt the familiar leather move with her skin like a second layer. Around her in the shuttle, other cadets sat in their seats with confidence radiating from every movement. A tall Kovathi cadet named Zixthar sat across from her. His insectoid features arranged in what Mira had learned was an expression of superiority. His exoskeleton gleamed with a purple sheen under the shuttle lights, independently as he checked his equipment. Next to him sat a Thessian female with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to see through everything. Other species filled the shuttle, all of them wearing the latest military gear with force-dampening gauntlets and neural link interfaces. Mira looked down at her simple gloves again and felt a flutter of doubt in her chest. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang that echoed through the hull. The airlock hissed open, and the cadets filed out into the gleaming corridor of the academy. Everything was chrome and light, with gravity panels beneath their feet that hummed softly. Mira stepped onto the deck and immediately felt the difference. The gravity here was set to galactic standard, which meant it was lighter than what she had grown up with. She felt almost like she might float away with each step. The other cadets moved toward the orientation hall, and Mira followed, her worn boots making soft sounds on the polished floor. Inside the massive hall, hundreds of cadets from across the galaxy gathered beneath a domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond. Mira found a spot near the back and stood quietly, her hands clasped behind her. "Look at that one," a voice hissed nearby. Mira turned slightly and saw 3 Kovathi cadets staring at her. Zixthar was among them, his mandibles clicking in what she recognized as laughter. "The Earthborn brought leather," one of them said, loud enough for others to hear. "Does her species not have force-dampening gauntlets?" another asked with mock concern. "Perhaps they are too primitive to manufacture proper equipment," Zixthar added, his voice carrying across the nearby cadets. Several heads turned to look at Mira. A Realm cadet, whose body seemed to be made of living crystal, tilted its head with what might have been pity. Even the Thessian from the shuttle glanced over. Expression unreadable, but her eyes lingering on the gloves. Mira felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her face neutral. She had expected this. Earth was new to the galactic community, having joined only 15 years ago. Humans were still the newcomers, the unknowns, the species that had barely left their own solar system when others had been traveling the stars for millennia. She adjusted her gloves carefully, checking that each finger could move freely. The leather was soft and pliable in all the right places, firm and supportive where she needed grip. A deep voice boomed through the hall, and all conversation stopped instantly. "Cadets, attention!" A massive Kovathi walked onto the stage at the front of the hall. His exoskeleton was scarred and dented, marked with the signs of countless battles. One of his 4 arms ended in a mechanical replacement that gleamed under the lights. "I am Chief Instructor Valmon," he said, announced, his voice resonating through the chamber. "You have been selected from billions across the galaxy to attend this academy." He paced across the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Half of you will not be here at the end of this semester." A murmur ran through the assembled cadets. "The gauntlet run will determine who has the strength, the will, and the adaptability to serve in the Galactic Defense Force," Valmon continued. "This is not a test of individual glory. You will be assigned partners from different species. You will learn to work together, or you will fail together." Holographic displays flickered to life around the hall, showing images of a massive obstacle course. Mira saw sections that twisted through zero gravity, areas where gravity increased to dangerous levels, and obstacles that required climbing, carrying, and endurance. The gauntlet run will take place in 6 weeks, Valmont said. Until then, you will train. You will learn your own weaknesses and the strengths of others. Partnership assignments will be posted tonight. The holographic displays vanished, and Valmont's eyes swept across the cadets one final time. Dismissed. The hall erupted into conversation as cadets began filing out. Mira moved with the crowd, keeping her head down. She made her way to the barracks assignment board and found her name on the list. Her bunk was in Bay 7, shared with 15 other cadets from various species. As she walked toward the barracks, she heard footsteps behind her. "Earthborn," a voice called. Mira turned to find Zixthar approaching with 2 other Kavathi. "I am curious," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Why do you wear those primitive gloves? Are you unable to afford proper equipment? Or does your species simply not understand modern technology?" The other Kavathi clicked their mandibles in amusement. Mira met his eyes, which was difficult given that Kavathi had compound eyes that reflected light in unsettling ways. "These gloves work for me," she said simply. "Work for you?" Zixthar repeated. "In what capacity?" "For grip," Mira replied. "For friction. For control." Zixthar seemed to consider this. Then his mandibles spread in what Mira knew was a dismissive gesture. "Friction," he said slowly. "How quaint. My force-dampening gauntlets can grip surfaces at the molecular level. They enhance my natural strength by a factor of 3. They interface with my neural pathways for instantaneous response. And your leather does what, exactly?" "It fits my hands," Mira said quietly. Zixthar laughed, a chittering sound that echoed off the corridor walls. "I see why Earth was so reluctant to join the galactic community. You have much to learn." Walked away with his companions, leaving Mira standing alone in the corridor. She looked down at her gloves again and flexed her fingers. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from years ago on the mining colony. "Gravity doesn't care about excuses, Mira. Your hands do the work, or the work doesn't get done. These gloves carried me through 20 years on the ore hoists. Now they're yours. Treat them well." Mira closed her hands into fists and felt the leather crease in familiar patterns. She had worn these gloves since she was 12 years old, working the mining hoists on Kepler 442b, a planet where gravity was 1.6 times Earth's standard. She had learned to grip, to pull, to hold, to endure. The gloves had molded to her hands over the years, becoming an extension of her own skin. She continued to the barracks and found her assigned bunk. Other cadets were already settling in, storing their gear, and introducing themselves. Mira placed her small pack on her bunk and sat down. The mattress was soft, far softer than anything she had slept on before. Across the bay, she noticed the Thessian from the shuttle watching her. Their eyes met for a moment before the Thessian looked away. That night, the partnership assignments appeared on everyone's datapads. Mira read hers with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Partner, Cadet Zixthar of Kovath Prime. She lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, the real training would begin. Tomorrow, she would have to prove that these simple leather gloves were more than what they seemed. Tomorrow, she would begin to show them all what it meant to be Earthborn. The first week of training revealed what Mira had feared and expected in equal measure. She was slower than the Kovathi, weaker than the Vreln, and lacked the psychic coordination that gave the Thessians their edge in combat simulations. Every exercise seemed designed to highlight what humans could not do, rather than what they could. On the third day, Instructor Valmont ordered all cadets to the zero-gravity combat arena. The massive spherical chamber floated in its own section of the station, accessible only through airlocks. Inside, there was no up or down, only the endless curve of the walls and the floating obstacles that drifted through the space. "Today, you will run the sphere course," Valmont announced from the observation deck. "Your goal is simple. Reach the far side in under 3 minutes. Your partners will observe and provide feedback." Mira floated near the entrance, her gloved hands gripping a handlebar. Zixthar hung in the air with all 4 arms crossed. "Try not to embarrass us both," he muttered. The buzzer sounded, and the first pair of cadets launched themselves into the sphere. A Kovathi and a Thessian moved through the space with practiced grace, using obstacles as push-off points, and calculating trajectories that seemed impossible. They reached the far side in 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Pair after pair went through, each one displaying abilities that seemed beyond Mira's reach. When her turn came, she pushed off from the entrance platform and immediately felt disoriented. In zero gravity, her sense of weight and direction vanished. She grabbed for a floating obstacle and missed, spinning slowly through the air. Around her, she could hear the soft clicks of Kovathi laughter. She managed to grab another obstacle and pull herself forward, but her movements were clumsy compared to the graceful flows she had witnessed. By the time she reached the far side, 4 minutes and 38 seconds had passed. Zixthar said nothing when she emerged from the airlock, but his silence was more cutting than any words could have been. In the low-gravity agility course, Mira fared slightly better, but still ranked in the bottom quarter of the class. Her human reflexes, evolved for Earth's gravity, seemed slow and uncertain in the lighter environment. Other cadets began to whisper when she passed. "The glove girl," they called her, though never quite loud enough for instructors to hear. Some looked at her with pity, others with dismissal. A few, like the Thessian named Lyra, watched her with expressions that Mira could not read. On the 7th day, Zixthar formally requested a partner change. Mira stood in Instructor Valmont's office while her partner made his case. "Sir, with respect, I believe I would be better served partnering with someone of comparable ability," Zixthar said. "The Earthborn lacks the natural advantages necessary for this training. She will drag down our combined performance in the gauntlet run." Valmont sat behind his desk, his scarred face unmoving. "Cadet Chen, do you wish to request a partner change?" he asked. Mira met his eyes and saw something there that made her straighten her spine. "No, sir," she said. "I do not." Valmont nodded slowly. "Cadet Zixthar, your request is denied," he said. "Adaptability is survival in combat. You will learn to work with species unlike your own, or you will fail. Not just in this course, but in any real mission where lives depend on cooperation." Dismissed. Zixthar's mandibles clicked in frustration, but he saluted and left. Mira started to follow, but Valmont's voice stopped her. "Cadet Chen, a moment." She turned back. "Yes, sir." "Time in the high-gravity training facility," Valmont said. "Most cadets avoid that area. Why do you go there?" Mira considered her answer carefully. "Because it feels like home, sir," she finally said. Valmont studied her for a long moment. "Continue your training as you see fit," he said. Dismissed. That night, Mira lay in her bunk and thought about home. Kepler 442b had been a mining colony on the edge of human-controlled space. Her parents had moved there before she was born, drawn by the promise of good pay and steady work. The planet's gravity was crushing compared to Earth's standard. Everything weighed more, fell faster, required more strength to lift. Children born there grew up strong, their bones dense, their muscles adapted to constant strain. Mira had started working the ore hoists when she was 12, the youngest her father would allow. The hoists were simple machines, really. Ran through pulleys, lifting containers of ore from the deep mines to the surface processors. When the powered lifts failed, which they often did, Workers had to operate the manual backup systems. That meant pulling heavy ropes with gloved hands, using body weight and leverage and sheer endurance to move loads that would break lesser grips. Her father had given her his old rigger's gloves on her first day. The gloves are important, he had told her. Fancy equipment fails, gravity doesn't fail. These gloves will grip when everything else lets go. She had worked the hoists for 6 years before the academy acceptance arrived. Her hands had grown strong, her grip unbreakable, her endurance honed by thousands of hours pulling against weight that never forgave weakness. The gloves had absorbed her sweat, molded to her palms, become part of her. Now, lying in a bunk, on a station where gravity was artificially light, she felt disconnected from everything that had made her who she was. The next morning, she returned to the high-gravity facility. The room was empty, as it usually was. Most cadets found the increased gravity uncomfortable or even painful. Mira activated the controls and set the gravity to 1.6 standard. Immediately, she felt the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders. She began her routine, pull-ups on the bar, rope climbs, weighted carries across the room. Each movement was harder here, required more effort, more will, but it felt right. She was halfway through her third set of rope climbs when she noticed someone watching from the observation window. Lyra, the Thessian, stood outside the room with her large dark eyes fixed on Mira. Their gazes met through the transparent barrier. Mira continued climbing until she reached the top of the rope, then descended with controlled movements. Room. Lyra was still there. "Why do you train in there?" Lyra asked. Her voice was soft, melodic in the way Thessian voices always were. "It's what I'm used to," Mira said, pulling off her gloves to wipe sweat from her face. "Your homeworld has higher gravity?" Lyra asked. "Yes," Mira said. "Much higher." Lyra tilted her head, considering this. "That must make our standard gravity feel strange to you," she said. "Like everything is too light," Mira agreed. "Like nothing has proper weight." "The other cadets think you're weak," Lyra said bluntly. "They don't understand why you struggle in our exercises." "I know," Mira said. "But you're not weak," Lyra continued. "I can sense strain in living beings. It's a Thessian ability. When you move, even in standard gravity, your body is working against something we can't feel. You're carrying weight we can't see." With surprise. "You're the first person to understand that," she said quietly. "Your partner doesn't see it," Lyra said. "Zixthar measures strength by his own standards. He thinks force-dampening gauntlets make him superior. He's wrong." Before Mira could respond, the training alarm sounded. Lyra nodded once and walked away, leaving Mira standing in the corridor. That afternoon's exercise was endurance running on the track. The artificial gravity was set to standard, and the cadets were required to complete 10 kilometers. Mira finished in the middle of the pack, not first, but far from last. Zixthar finished 3 minutes ahead of her and barely seemed winded. As she crossed the finish line, she saw him shake his head in disappointment. "Acceptable," he said when she approached, "but only just. The gauntlet run will require more than acceptable performance." "I know," Mira said. "You should train harder," Zixthar suggested, "or train smarter." He walked away before she could respond. Mira stood on the track, her breath coming hard, sweat soaking through her shirt. Other cadets passed by, some acknowledging her with nods, others ignoring her completely. She looked down at her gloves and thought about the hoists back home, about the weight of ore containers and the bite of rope through leather, about the ache in her shoulders after a 12-hour shift, about her father's words, "Your hands do the work, or the work doesn't get done." 3 weeks until the gauntlet run. 3 weeks to prove that she belonged here. 3 weeks to show them all that Earth had something to offer the galaxy. She walked back to the barracks, with determination settling in her chest, like a weight she knew how to carry. The variable gravity chamber was the most feared training facility in the entire academy. It was a massive cube-shaped room where the gravity could shift without warning, simulating the chaotic conditions of damaged ships or unstable planetary environments. On the morning of the 4th week, all cadets were ordered to report for mandatory chamber training. Mira entered with her class and immediately felt the subtle shift beneath her feet as the gravity fluctuated between standard and slightly elevated. The chamber's walls were smooth metal, offering few handholds. Floating obstacles hung from invisible force fields, creating a maze of platforms and barriers. "Today's exercise is simple," Instructor Valmont announced from the observation deck above. "Navigate from one side of the chamber to the other, while gravity fluctuates. Your bodies must adapt to constant change. Pause. Begin." The first group of cadets entered the chamber. Mira watched as they moved through the space, their bodies adjusting to the shifting gravity with varying degrees of success. Some stumbled when the gravity suddenly increased. Others overcompensated when it decreased. After the first group completed the course, Mira's group was called forward. She stepped into the chamber with Zixthar beside her, and 20 other cadets spread across the starting platform. The gravity was currently set to standard, but Mira could feel the hum of the generators beneath her feet. "Move," Valmont commanded. Mira started forward, her gloved hands ready to grab obstacles if needed. The gravity shifted to 0.8 standard, and she felt herself become lighter. Around her, other cadets adapted quickly, their training kicking in. Then the gravity dropped to 0.4, and everyone began to float. Mira pushed off from a platform and sailed through the air, grabbing a hanging obstacle. Redirect her momentum. The Kovathi cadets used their multiple arms to excellent effect, grasping multiple points simultaneously. The Thessians moved with an almost prescient grace, as if they could sense where the next handhold would be. Suddenly, without warning, the gravity spiked. Mira felt it hit like a physical blow. Her body, which had been nearly weightless a moment before, suddenly weighed more than it ever had, even on her homeworld. The gravity had jumped to 4 times standard. Around her, cadets cried out in shock and pain. Bodies that had been floating crashed to the floor with sickening thuds. Of Realm cadets' crystalline structure cracked audibly as it impacted the metal deck. Kovathi collapsed under their own suddenly multiplied weight. Thessians, whose species evolved on a low-gravity world, crumpled like paper. Mira hit the ground hard, but managed to roll with the impact. Her muscles screamed in protest. But she had felt this weight before. 4 times standard was less than 3 times what she had grown up with on Kepler 442b. She pushed herself to her hands and knees, breathing hard. All around her, cadets lay on the floor, some unconscious, others groaning in pain. "Emergency shutdown," she heard someone shout from the observation deck, but the chamber's gravity didn't change. "The controls aren't responding," another voice called. "The safety systems have failed." Mira forced herself to stand. Her legs shook with effort, but they held. She looked around and saw Zixthar lying a few feet away, all 4 of his arms pinned beneath him. His mandibles were open in a silent gasp of pain. Further away, Lyra lay motionless, blood trickling from their nose. The exit was 30 meters away across the chamber. At 4 times standard gravity, it might as well have been 30 kilometers. Forward. Her boots felt like they were made of lead. Each movement required deliberate effort, but her body remembered this weight. Her muscles, built on a high-gravity world, knew how to function under this pressure. She reached Lyra first and grabbed the Thessian under her arms. Lyra's eyes fluttered open. "Can't move," she whispered. "I've got you," Mira said. She began dragging Lyra toward the exit. Each step was agony. Her back screamed, her legs burned, her lungs couldn't seem to get enough air. But she had done this before. She had dragged ore containers across loading docks. She had pulled equipment up mine shafts. She had carried her father to the med station when a cable had snapped and broken his leg. This was just weight. Weight was something she understood. She reached the exit platform and carefully laid Lyra down. Then she turned back into the chamber. Near the center, their crystalline bodies spider-webbed with cracks. Mira made her way to them and carefully lifted their surprisingly heavy form. Crystal, she learned, became very heavy at high gravity. She carried them back to the exit, her gloves providing grip even as her hands began to sweat. The leather didn't slip, didn't fail. Back into the chamber. A Kavathi cadet whose name she didn't know. His exoskeleton had partially buckled under the pressure. She hooked her arms under his and dragged him across the floor. Her vision began to tunnel. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she kept moving. Zixthar next. He was conscious now, his eyes following her as she approached. "Don't," he managed to say. "You'll hurt yourself." "Shut up," Mira gasped. She grabbed his primary arms and pulled. Kavathi were heavy, even in standard gravity. At 4 times standard, he felt like he weighed as much as a small vehicle. She dragged him inch by inch toward the exit. Halfway there, her legs gave out. She fell to her knees, but kept pulling. Her gloves gripped his exoskeleton, the leather finding purchase where smooth metal should have been too slick. 10 meters from the exit, she had to stop and rest. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Sweat poured down her face and stung her eyes. "Leave me," Zixthar said weakly. "Get yourself out." "No," Mira said. She forced herself to stand and pulled again. 5 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter. She collapsed on the exit platform with Zixthar beside her. But there were still 3 cadets in the chamber. She looked at them through the haze of exhaustion. They were all moving slightly, which meant they were alive. She had to go back. Mira pushed herself up once more. Her hands were shaking now. She could feel bruises forming across her entire body. But she went back. The next cadet was smaller, a Thessian male who weighed almost nothing, even at 4 times gravity. She carried him in her arms like a child. The 7th cadet was another Kavathi. This time, when she grabbed his arms, her strength finally failed completely. She fell forward and couldn't get back up. Her muscles had reached their limit. She lay on the chamber floor, trying to force her body to move, but nothing responded. Through the fog of pain and exhaustion, she heard a metallic grinding sound. The gravity suddenly cut out completely. 0 gravity washed over the chamber, and Mira found herself floating. Emergency personnel in exoskeletons rushed in. They gathered the remaining cadets, including Mira, and pulled them out of the chamber. In the medical bay, Mira lay on a bed while medical scanners hummed over her. Instructor Valmont stood nearby, speaking with another instructor she didn't recognize. "How is the Earthborn still conscious?" the other instructor asked. "Everyone else required sedation. Some even required medical comas." Valmont looked at Mira, and she saw something in his scarred face that might have been respect. "Because 4 standard is what she was born in," he said quietly. "This isn't survival for her. It's home." The other instructors stared at Mira with new eyes. "I didn't realize," they said. "How did she move in that gravity?" "The same way her species moved mountains before they had anti-gravity technology," Valmont replied. "With will and muscle and refusal to quit." Mira closed her eyes and let the medical scanners do their work. Her hands still wore her gloves. The leather was dark with sweat and streaked with the blood from her palms, where the strain had split her skin. But they had held. They had gripped when everything else failed. PL. Later that night, after the medics had treated her for return to barracks, Mira found Lyra waiting outside the medical bay. "You saved 7 of us," Lyra said. 7 cadets who would have died if the gravity hadn't been shut down when it was. "I only got 6 out," Mira said. "The 7th you dragged to within reach of the rescue team," Lyra corrected. "That counts." Mira nodded, too tired to argue. "Your world," Lyra said slowly. "What's it like?" Mira thought about Kepler 442b, about the weight of every step, the effort of every movement, about a childhood spent learning that rest was a luxury and strength was survival. Heavy, she finally said. Everything's heavy. You learn to carry it, or it crushes you. Lyra reached out and gently touched one of Mira's gloved hands. I understand now, the Thessian said. Those aren't primitive equipment. What you need them to be. In her bunk, that night, Mira examined her gloves by the dim light of the barracks. The leather was worn almost through in some places. The stitching her father had done years ago was coming loose, but they had held. When technology failed and gravity became an enemy, her simple leather gloves had been the only thing that worked. She carefully folded them and placed them beside her pillow. Tomorrow there would be questions about the chamber malfunction. Tomorrow she would have to face her classmates, who now looked at her with different eyes. But tonight she could rest. Tonight she had proven something to herself, that the weight she carried was also her strength. The atmosphere in the academy changed after the gravity chamber incident. Cadets who had previously ignored Mira now nodded when she passed in the corridors. Some even asked her questions about training in high gravity. The mockery didn't stop completely, but it became quieter, more uncertain. 3 days after the incident, a Kavathi cadet named Rixval approached Mira in the training facility. I want to learn your methods, he said, without preamble. What methods? Mira asked. How you moved in 4 standard gravity, Rixval explained. My people are strong, but in that chamber I was helpless. You weren't, Mira said. Mira looked at him, surprised by the directness of the request. I just did what I've always done, she said. Which is what? Rixval pressed. Mira thought about it for a moment. I broke it down into small movements, she said. When everything is heavy, you can't think about the whole distance. You think about the next step. Then the step after that. You keep going until you're done. Rixval considered this. Will you show me? He asked. That afternoon, Mira found herself in the high-gravity facility with Rixval and 2 other cadets who had heard about the training session. She set the gravity to 2.5 standard, lower than her homeworld, but higher than most species could comfortably manage. The other cadets struggled immediately. Your instinct is to fight the gravity, Mira explained. Don't. Accept the weight. Work with it, not against it. She demonstrated a simple walk across the room, her movements deliberate and controlled. See how I keep my center of gravity low, she said. High steps waste energy. Slide your feet, stay connected to the ground. The cadets tried to copy her movements. It was clumsy at first, but after an hour, they had improved. Noticeably, word spread through the academy. More cadets began showing up to Mira's high-gravity training sessions. She didn't advertise them, didn't claim to be an expert, but she shared what she knew. Meanwhile, her relationship with Zixthar began to shift. The Kovathi didn't apologize for his earlier dismissal of her abilities, but he stopped complaining about their partnership. One morning, 2 weeks before the gauntlet run, he approached her in the cafeteria. We need to discuss strategy, he said, sitting across from her without invitation. Mira looked up from her meal. For the run? She asked. Of course for the run, Zixthar said. I have been analyzing the course specifications. He pulled up a holographic display from his datapad. The gauntlet run course materialized above the table in miniature. The course begins at 0.2 standard gravity, he explained. It progresses through various sections, each increasing in gravity. The final section reaches 6 times standard. Mira studied the display. She had seen the basic layout before, but Zixthar had added detailed annotations. Here, he pointed to a section about 2/3 through the course. This is what concerns me. The hoisting point. The hologram zoomed in to show a vertical section 50 meters high. Teams must carry a rescue dummy up this shaft, Zixthar explained. The gravity at this point will be 5 times standard. Most teams will fail here. Will you be able to climb it? Mira asked. Zixthar's mandibles clicked in what she had learned was a gesture of uncertainty. In 0.2 gravity, I am stronger than anyone in our class, he said. In 5 standard gravity, I become a liability. My species evolved on a light gravity world. We compensate with technology and tactics, not brute strength. Her, directly. But you, he said, you grew up in heavy gravity. This is your advantage. Mira nodded slowly. So what are you suggesting, she asked. A division of labor, Zixthar said. I lead us through the low-gravity sections, where my strength and speed excel. You take over in the high-gravity sections, where my advantages become weaknesses. We play to our respective strengths. It was the first time he had acknowledged that she had strengths worth considering. That could work, Mira agreed, but we'll need to practice the transitions. Over the following days, they trained together with new purpose. Zixthar was faster than Mira in standard gravity and below. His 4 arms gave him advantages in climbing and maneuvering that she couldn't match. But as the gravity increased, the dynamics shifted. Mira's movements stayed consistent, while Zixthar slowed dramatically. Handoffs. Learning where in the course, Mira should take the lead. They worked on communication, developing simple signals since shouting would be difficult under high-gravity strain. One evening, Instructor Valmon summoned Mira to his office. She entered to find the scarred Kavathi reviewing data on multiple screens. "Cadet Chen," he said without looking up. "Sir," she replied, standing at attention. "Sit," Valmon commanded. She sat. "I've been reviewing your training records," he said, finally turning to face her. "Your improvement in low-gravity exercises has been minimal." "Yes, sir," Mira acknowledged. "But your endurance scores have increased dramatically," he continued. "And I've received reports that you're running unauthorized training sessions in the high-gravity facility." Mira tensed. "They're not unauthorized, sir," she said carefully. "The facility is open to all cadets. I'm simply using it when others choose not to." Valmon's expression might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell with Kavathi features. "I'm not reprimanding you, cadet," he said. "I'm observing." He stood and walked to the window that overlooked the training areas. "I fought alongside human Marines in the border wars," he said quietly. 20 years ago, before Earth officially joined the galactic community. We were on a mining station that came under attack. Gravity generators were damaged. Gravity fluctuated wildly, from 0 to 6 standard in random patterns. Mira listened, sensing this was important. "Every species in our defensive force struggled," Valmon continued. "Kavathi, Thessians, Realm, all of us. We were trained for combat, but the shifting gravity made us clumsy, vulnerable. Then the human Marines moved forward." He turned to look at her. "They didn't move faster or stronger than us," he said, "but they moved consistently. When gravity spiked and I was pinned to the floor, unable to stand, I watched a human Marine walk past me, carrying a wounded Thessian. She moved like the gravity didn't matter, like she had been carrying that weight her whole life. That Marine," Valmon said quietly, "she wore gloves just like yours." Mira felt something catch in her throat. "We held that station," Valmon said, "largely because humans could function when the rest of us couldn't. I've seen Earthborn hold positions when species with twice the muscle mass broke and ran. You carry your world's weight in your bones, Cadet Chen. Don't forget that when the gauntlet run begins." "Yes, sir," Mira said. Dismissed. She left his office with new understandings settling in her mind. The night before the gauntlet run, Mira sat in the barracks, checking her equipment. Her gloves lay on her bunk. Leather worn smooth by years of use. She had cleaned them carefully and reinforced the stitching with new thread. Beside her gloves, she had the standard Academy issue equipment: water reservoir, emergency beacon, medical kit. It all seemed inadequate for what tomorrow would bring. Lyra approached and sat on the adjacent bunk. "Nervous?" the Thessian asked. "Yes," Mira admitted. "Good," Lyra said. "Only fools feel no fear before a challenge." "How do you think your people will do?" Mira asked. Lyra's expression was difficult to read. My partner and I have practiced extensively, she said, but the course favors physical strength over psychic coordination. We'll do our best. She gestured to Mira's gloves. You'll wear those tomorrow? She asked. Always, Mira said. They're part of me now. The other cadets used to mock them, Lyra observed. Now they ask you about them. Is earned in strange ways. Mira picked up the gloves and flexed them. My father wore these for 20 years, she said. He pulled ore containers that weighed more than most species could imagine. When I wear them, I remember that I come from people who don't quit. Who can't quit, because quitting means death in a place where gravity crushes the weak. Lyra nodded slowly. Earth produced a strong species, she said, not in the ways the Kavathi are strong, or the Realm, but strong in ways that matter when everything else fails. She stood to leave, then paused. I'll see you at the starting line tomorrow, Lyra said. Try to get some rest. After lights out, Mira lay in her bunk and thought about the course. 50 meters of vertical climbing at 5 standard gravity, carrying a 200-pound dummy. This was the moment that would define whether she belonged at the academy, would prove that Earth's children can stand equal among the stars. She closed her hands around her gloves and felt the familiar leather against her skin. Tomorrow, she would show them what hoisting meant. Tomorrow, they would all understand why Earthborn wore leather when the real work began. The morning of the gauntlet run arrived with the harsh buzz of the academy alarm. Mira woke before the sound finished, her body already tense with anticipation. She dressed in the standard academy training suit and pulled on her father's gloves. The leather felt right against her skin, familiar and reassuring. In the gathering hall, 47 teams assembled, 94 cadets from across the galaxy, all preparing for the challenge that would determine their future at the academy. Instructor Valmon stood at the front of the hall, with other senior instructors flanking him. Today, you will face the gauntlet run, his voice echoed through the chamber. This course has broken better cadets than you. It has ended promising careers. It has revealed the truth about who has the strength to serve in the Galactic Defense Force. He gestured to the massive display behind him. The course materialized in holographic detail. You will begin in 0.2 gravity, Valmon continued. The course will take you through obstacles designed to test speed, strength, coordination, and endurance. Gravity will increase progressively until you reach the final section at 6 times standard. You must complete the entire course in 15 minutes while carrying a rescue dummy weighing 200 pounds at standard gravity. That weight will increase proportionally as gravity increases. Mira did the math in her head. At 6 times gravity, the dummy would effectively weigh 1,200 pounds. Teams will launch at 30-second intervals, Valmon said. The top 20 teams will pass this trial. All others will be removed from the academy. Take your positions. Mira and Zixthar moved to their starting position, were designated as Team 17, which meant they would launch in the middle of the pack. Teams prepared. Some were doing last-minute stretches. Others stood in silence, conserving energy. Mira checked her gloves one final time. Zixthar extended one of his 4 hands. Whatever happens today, he said, you have earned my respect, Earthborn. Mira gripped his hand firmly. Let's show them what we can do, she replied. The first team launched with a roar from the spectators. Mira watched on the display screens as a Kavathi-Vreln partnership tore through the early obstacles with impressive speed. Team after team followed. Some started strong. Others struggled immediately. By the time Team 17 was called to the starting line, 12 teams had already finished, and 7 had failed to complete the course within the time limit. Team 17, approach the line, the automated voice announced. Mira and Zixthar moved forward. The rescue dummy waited on a platform between them. Was humanoid in shape, but made of dense material. Even in the current 0.2 gravity, It weighed 40 pounds. "On my mark," the automated voice said. 3, 2, 1, begin. They launched forward together. Zixthar grabbed the dummy with 2 arms, while using his other 2 to propel them through the first obstacle. Mira kept pace beside him, her lighter weight and low gravity actually a disadvantage here. The first section was a maze of floating platforms. Zixthar navigated it with precision, his 4 arms giving him balance that Mira couldn't match. She followed his path, trusting his lead. They cleared the first section in 90 seconds, well ahead of pace. The gravity increased to 0.5 standard. Still low enough for Zixthar to excel. He carried the dummy through a section that required swinging between hanging obstacles. Mira's job here was to keep up and be ready for the handoff when gravity became an enemy instead of an ally. At 1.2 gravity, they reached a climbing wall. Zixthar scaled it with the dummy slung over his shoulders. Mira climbed beside him, her gloves finding purchase on the handholds. 2.5 gravity hit like a wave. Suddenly the dummy weighed 500 pounds. Zixthar stumbled, his 4 arms straining. "Switch," Mira called. She moved beside him and took the dummy. The weight settled onto her shoulders like coming home. Her legs bent under the load, but held. They were entering her territory now. The course narrowed into a corridor where they had to drag the dummy through a series of tight spaces. At 3 standard gravity, the dummy weighed 600 pounds. Mira pulled with steady determination. Her gloves gripped the dummy's harness, the leather finding friction where smooth materials would slip. Behind them, Mira could hear Zixthar breathing hard. Glanced back and saw him struggling to keep up. His species wasn't built for this gravity. "Stay with me," she called. "I'm trying," he gasped. 4 standard gravity. The dummy now weighed 800 pounds. Mira's muscles screamed, but she forced them to keep working. She had pulled heavier loads in the mines. She had dragged ore containers across loading bays. This was just weight. Weight was what she knew. They cleared another section, moving past 2 teams that had stalled under the increasing gravity. 5 standard gravity. 1,000 pounds. The course opened up ahead, and Mira saw what had been described to her. The hoisting point. A vertical shaft 50 meters high. Pulleys and ropes hung from the ceiling. A platform waited at the top. To pass this section, they had to get the dummy to that platform. Around her, other teams were collapsing. Lay on the ground, unable to move. 2 Kovathi, who had started strong, were now pinned by the gravity. Their force-dampening gauntlets sparked and failed. The technology couldn't handle the strain. Mira looked up at the shaft. 50 meters, 1,000 pounds, 5 times the gravity she was born in. She removed her jacket despite the cold. Her arms, scarred from years of mining work, were revealed to everyone watching. She approached the rope system. These were manual backups, designed for use when technology failed. Simple pulleys and cables. No motors, no assistance, just rope and leverage and human determination. Mira examined the setup with practiced eyes. She recognized the configuration. It was similar to the hoisting systems from her homeworld. She threaded rope through specialized rings sewn into her gloves. Her father had added these rings years ago for exactly this purpose. "What are you doing?" Zixthar gasped from where he lay on the ground. "What I was born to do," Mira replied. She secured the dummy to the rope system. The weight transferred to her hands, 1,000 pounds pulling against her grip. She began to pull, hand over hand, using her body weight and the mechanical advantage of the pulleys. The rope bit into her gloves, but the leather held. Up in the observation deck, a young Vrelm cadet watched in confusion. "What is she doing?" the cadet asked. Instructor Valmon stood with his arms crossed, his scarred face impassive. "Earthborn wear those when hoisting," he said quietly. "Before your people had anti-gravity, before the Kovathi had exoskeletons, Humans moved mountains with rope and leather and will. She's showing you why Earth joined the galactic community as equals, not subjects. Mira pulled. Each meter gained was agony. Burned. Her back screamed. Her hands felt like they were being crushed despite the gloves. But she had done this before. She had done this for years. The dummy rose. 1 meter, 5 meters, 10 meters. Around the observation deck, cadets from other teams stopped watching their own attempts and focused on Mira. 20 meters. Her vision began to tunnel. Blood pounded in her ears. 30 meters. The rope began to slip through her gloves. The leather was smoking from friction. 40 meters. She tasted blood in her mouth from biting her lip. Her legs shook uncontrollably, but she kept pulling. 45 meters. Almost there. Her hands were bleeding now. She could feel warm blood soaking into the leather. 48 meters. Every muscle in her body was on fire. 50 meters. The dummy reached the platform. Collapsed. She lay on the ground, gasping, unable to move. Around her, the course had gone silent. Every cadet still conscious was staring. Zixthar crawled to her side. "You did it," he whispered. "We're not done yet," Mira managed to say. She forced herself to stand. They still had to reach the finish line. The gravity increased one final time. 6 standard gravity. Everything weighed 6 times normal. The finish line was visible now, 20 meters away. Mira took a step, then another. Zixthar moved beside her, both of them barely able to walk. They crossed the finish line together and collapsed. The timer showed 13 minutes and 47 seconds. 4th place overall. In the medical bay, Mira woke to find her gloves beside her. Someone had cleaned them and attempted to repair the damage. The leather was scorched in places. The stitching had torn completely through. In others. But they had held. They had held when everything else failed. Zixthar sat in a chair beside her bed. "I was wrong about you," he said without preamble. "About your species, about those gloves. In my culture, acknowledging error is difficult. But I witnessed something today I didn't think possible. Strength without technology. Will without enhancement. You pulled 1,000 pounds through 50 meters at 5 standard gravity, using nothing but rope and lever. I owe you an apology." Mira started to speak, but the door opened. Lyra entered, followed by other cadets. Rixval, the Kovathi who had asked her to teach him. A Vrown whose name was Crescent. Others she recognized from training. "We want to learn," Lyra said simply. "Learn what?" Mira asked. "Whatever you can teach us," Rixval replied. "Your methods, your techniques. Technology fails. How to keep going when everything says quit." Over the following weeks, Mira found herself teaching more and more cadets. The high-gravity facility, once empty, became crowded with students. She taught them about leverage and grip, about breaking impossible tasks into possible steps, about enduring when endurance seemed impossible. Instructor Valmon observed these sessions, but never interrupted. One evening he called Mira to his office. "Walk with me," he said. They left the office and walked through the academy halls. Valmon led her to a corridor she had never visited. The Hall of Honor. Display cases lined the walls, containing artifacts from the academy's history. Valmon stopped at a new exhibit. Inside a glass case sat a pair of worn leather gloves. Mira's gloves. Beside them a plaque read, "They carried their world with them. Every species brings something unique." "To the stars," Valmon said. "The Kovathi brought tactical brilliance. The Thessians brought psychic coordination. The Vrown brought technological innovation. Humans brought endurance." He gestured to the gloves. "When everything fails, when technology breaks, when strength fades, humans keep going. That's your gift to the galaxy. Don't ever forget it." Mira looked at the gloves through the glass. They were battered, scorched, torn. But they represented something larger than simple tools. They represented a species that had climbed out of a gravity well through sheer determination, that had reached for the stars with nothing but will and ingenuity. that had earned their place among the galaxy's greatest powers, not through superior weapons or technology, but through refusing to quit. "I won't forget, sir," Mira said. She returned to her barracks that night and found a package on her. Bunk. Inside was a new pair of rigger's gloves. Leather, fingerless, with reinforced stitching, and the same specialized rings for hoisting. A note was tucked inside. "Proud of you always, Dad." Mira held the new gloves and smiled. She would wear them tomorrow. She would teach other cadets about the weight of worlds and the strength of simple tools. She would show the galaxy that Earth's children carried something precious. Not advanced technology or enhanced abilities, but something deeper. Something earned through generations of people who looked at impossible challenges and said, "We'll find a way." And they always did. Because that was what it meant to be Earthborn. That was what it meant to wear the gloves.